Walter White didn't just break bad, he shattered every part of himself. He went from a struggling high school teacher to one of the most ruthless criminals in TV history. But the scariest part, he never thought of himself as a villain. What if I told you that Walter's downfall wasn't a tragic accident, but something that his own mind set in motion from the very beginning? You see, power doesn't actually change you, it reveals who you really are. Now, Walter White wasn't always Heisenberg. At the start, he was just an overqualified, underpaid high school chemistry teacher struggling to make ends meet. He worked a second job at a car wash and he was forced to clean the very same students' cars who disrespected him in class. And this wasn't just about money, it was about power, or rather the lack of it. Walter felt small, ignored, and helpless. Even when Walter was diagnosed with cancer, he wasn't in control. His family immediately started planning his treatment, making decisions for him. No one asked what he wanted. He realized that his entire life had been dictated by others. And this is where the power paradox comes in. This is when someone who has been powerless for so long finally gets power and they don't just embrace it, they become consumed by it. Walter's first step into the meth business wasn't about greed, it was about taking control for the first time in his life. He didn't want to be weak anymore. And with Jesse by his side, he finally had a way to use his intelligence for something big. Now, let's look at the scene where Walter blows up Tuco's office with fulminated mercury. This moment changed everything. Walter wasn't just making meth, he was making people fear him. Tuco, a violent and unpredictable drug dealer, was now looking at him with respect. For the first time, Walter White wasn't invisible. He was powerful, and that feeling was more addictive than any drug that he could ever cook. Now, Walter didn't start off as a killer. When he captured Krazy 8, he actually tried to convince himself that maybe you could let him go. He even wrote out a list, weighing the pros and cons. But when he finally realized that Krazy 8 was planning to kill him first, he made his decision. He strangled him to death with a bike lock. And something in him changed. He was horrified, but he told himself he had no choice. This is something called as the justification trap. That is, the more bad decisions we make, the more we convince ourselves that they were necessary. Once Walter crossed this line, each new crime became easier. Now, fast forward to Jane's death. This time, Walter doesn't hesitate. He just watches as she chokes on her own vomit and lets it happen. Why? Because in his mind, Jane was a threat. She was controlling Jesse, and Jesse was his best business partner. But here's the terrifying part. He still believed he was doing this for Jesse's own good. By now, Walter wasn't just reacting to threats, he was creating them. He poisoned a child, making Jesse believe it was. He didn't just justify his actions, he started believing he was always right. And that's when Heisenberg fully took over. Now, at what point do we stop being the hero of our own story? Do you think Walter could have walked away before it was too late? Now, let's look at the scene where Walter is walking into Gus's hospital room, believing he won. Walter was convinced he could control everything. He outsmarted Tuco, he tricked Jesse, and when he finally killed Gus Fring, he thought he had beaten the game. But this is where the illusion of control comes in. When people believe they have more control over events than they actually do. We see this when Walter is meeting with Jack's gang, arrogantly believing that they'll do what he says. Walter thought he could manipulate Jack's gang the same way he did with everybody else. But here's the truth. Once you step into the world of crime, you don't make the rules anymore. And when Jack ignored Walter's pleas and executed Hank, Walter finally realized he was never in control. So yeah, there was a scene where Walter is crying after Hank's death. So for the first time, Walter saw the truth. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just another pawn in a game much bigger than himself. Now, coming to the scene where Skyler is asking Walter, when is enough? Walter had more money than he could ever spend. He could have walked away, but he didn't. That is a scarcity mindset. People who come from nothing develop an irrational fear of losing everything. Even when they have more than enough, they still feel like it's never enough. And there was a scene where Walter admits to Skyler, I did it for me, I liked it, I was good at it. And in the end, Walter finally tells the truth. This wasn't about his family, it was power, about control. And once he tasted it, he couldn't stop. Now, let's look at the last scene where Walter is bleeding out in the meth lab, surrounded by the empire he built. Walter spent years chasing power, believing he was always in control. But in the end, he wasn't the king, he wasn't even a player. He was just another man who let power destroy him. The question is, was this transformation inevitable, or could Walter have stopped it before it was too late? Now, let me know in the comments, was Walter a victim of his circumstances, or he was his own worst enemy? And if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share and subscribe to this channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.